Special session to order. To view the meeting's presentation documents, please access Board Docs. The link to the Board Docs website can be found via the D38 website on the Board of Education meetings webpage. To view the live stream video of this meeting, please go to the Lewis Palmer School District 38 YouTube page. Ms. Wood, could you call roll, please?
Yes. Ms. Phillips?
Here.
Ms. Upchurch?
Here.
Mr. Taylor?
Here.
And I believe Mr. Clausen will be calling in later, and Mr. Schwartz is absent and excused.
Correct. Thank you. Could you all follow me in a pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So our Chief Financial Officer, Kitty Overton, will present an updated summary of our 2022-2023 proposed budget. Hi, Kitty.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So the proposed budget that was presented at the May 15th board meeting is available on the Financial Transparency website. Changes made to that since May 15th have been posted in board docs, and this is just a brief summary of highlighted changes that have occurred in the proposed budget. First of all, there really hasn't been much change other than a little bit of movement in between specific line items, so pretty much keeping revenues and expenditures the same as what was in the original proposed budget, except for this added transfer from general fund to the capital reserve fund in the amount of $300,000. The reason for this is twofold. One, we do need to cover a lease payment for the Sterling Bank lease purchase agreement for the Schneider Electric work. And then also we added just a slight bit for additional work needed in the asphalt and concrete projects.
I'm curious, the bus leases, where are they tracked?
They are also in cap reserve.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's there. Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
there's a bus lease and there's also a lease for some operations vehicles.
All right, great.
And just to recap a little bit of how we use the additional revenue that the district will be receiving this year compared to last year. So if we compare the proposed budget for 22-23 to the 21-22 adjusted budget, the increase to total revenue comes to $4.8 million. The change from the, the increase for the transfer to MA is approximately 1.3. I just want to point out that these are increases, not totals, right? And then the net increase to available resources comes to $3.5 million. If we take 80% of that, that's $2.8 million, which is just a rough estimate of how much we spend on compensation. And currently, projections look like the total compensation included in the proposed budget comes to approximately an additional cost of $2.9 million. So those are pretty much in alignment. There was a question about how are we using the 5.2, but that's a little bit hard to do that analysis. The 5.2 change in total revenues less allocations is looking at the increase over 21-22 budget, which included transfers to capital reserve and transportation that were utilizing fund balance. So it wasn't really true additional revenues.
A quick question. And maybe it'll come out, but so we got a total incremental total revenue of 4.8, and you've accounted for it. The difference that's not in comp, has that been absorbed in the budget as well? So that's sort of a net zero?
That's correct, yes. Okay. We had to build in a little bit extra just for inflationary costs and
that's what I was going to ask
expected
about.
increases,
Yeah,
yes.
very good. Very good.
Okay. And lastly, this is just a reiteration pie chart representing how 1999 mill levy override dollars are used. These are just in alignment with what was originally outlined in the 1999 mill levy. The only thing that really changes from year to year is the MA allocation increases based on their population growth. So we shrink our instructional support accordingly to that growth for Monument Academy. And obviously, these categories, we spend quite a bit more in each of these categories. So it's just a representation of how those MLO dollars are at use.
So it's a subset of the larger budget. But
Correct.
these are all less than what we spend. It just, this was how it's allocated for the original MLO.
Absolutely.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is all I have.
So while Chris is working on that, I appreciate slide number 3. I think it's lays it out pretty simple terms.
It's a good
layman terms.
reminder.
Yep, thanks. And I appreciate that it shows that 80% for compensation.
Yeah.
So to recap, the last work session when we went through the detailed budget that you said is posted on the transparency
It is,
site.
yes.
Right. This is the incremental changes since then.
That's correct.
So what we're doing for our flexible budgeting is we're going to approve this budget and then still adjust revenue once we know the actual October count,
That's
obviously
correct.
in November, December, right, when we finalize it. So we're following the same procedure as prior year.
Absolutely. Yep.
Perfect, perfect. Teresa, do you have any questions on the presentation of the budget update?
I don't have any questions. Thank you for the incremental work. It's helpful. And no, I'm good. Thank you.
I would just add also make sure to my fellow board members to click on the all funds detail for the proposed. That really lists it out and breaks it down. It gives all the salaries. It's pretty comprehensive in my opinion
The
on
one
that
posted.
piece. Huh?
The one that's posted?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Summers, anything to add?
No, I just appreciate the amount of continued work and detailed analysis, and I know that this is technically our public hearing, so
Well, I would echo that as well. These 4 pages seem like, well, that didn't take much, right? But I know that that's a lot of work to get to this. So thank you for all the work that happens to get to here, because this summary is excellent. So thank you. And I recognize that's a lot of work.
I appreciate all you've done.
Thank you.
On this. Thanks.
All right.
And we appreciate you.
So we have a section or an agenda item for public comments regarding this 22-23 district budget proposal. So we had no sign-ups for public comments. I would just remind the public that we do accept emails. There's a provision now in our public comment policy that enables emails to be sent and posted. So with that, we've got one more? No, this is it for the public special meeting. So that will conclude our special session. So Dr. Summers, it appears to me that our work session is made up of primarily 5 topics, which are 5 priorities. If I might, the first priority is the environment at our schools, student services, and then we have the learning services update, which is curriculum, et cetera. We have our HR in this case is specifically about compensation, which is the longer of them. And then there's a financial services update, and lastly, a community relations and communications update. The first two are 15 minutes, and then each of the following three will be 20. So if we could just go in that order, I won't announce them individually. I'll just
Sure.
do it the way I've done that just now. And we'll start with Executive Director of Student Services, Rick Frampton, who's ill, as I understand it, and you're going to sub.
I am. I'm actually pinch hitting for both priority 1 and priority 5, so I'll be the bookend. And then we'll have the more distinguished rest of our team presenting the other priorities. So I'm happy to pinch hit for Mr. Frampton here. So what we are presenting this morning in our priority 1 update, well, first, before I dive into some data that we'll speak to, we wanted to share and celebrate the fact that we had the opportunity as our school year was coming to a close. As we know, our last day with students was May 20th. And then the following week, we had a number of staff who technically should have been done on Wednesday, who remained through the week to engage in a couple of different social emotional learning resource trainings. So I just wanted to speak to this briefly. The responsive classroom training, which included many of our elementary and preschool staff. We had 94 staff attending those full-day trainings across 4 days, 27 attending a specials training, which was on 1 day. And thanks to Bear Creek Elementary for helping us host those events. And I think what you will be pleased to see as we're moving into the beginning of next year is alignment, not only with the goals within this priority, but the strategies and the practices that are going to be built into what we desire for every student through all of our classrooms to experience in ways that really get to the core of how do we support that social emotional learning competency and character education at a foundational level. And then also pleased to share that we had a number of staff members, 45 to be precise, at the secondary level, so that includes middle school and both of our high schools, who received Capturing Kids' Hearts training. Just want to remind you that 2 years ago, both high schools began implementing Capturing Kids' Hearts, and the training that this encompassed allowed many of our new or teachers who have not yet had that training to receive it. We are going to continue to offer trainings as we work through into next year and beyond. So what you will see is alignment and collaboration and just a nice blend of what we're looking at across the K-12, pre-K-12 curriculum in terms of that SEL piece. And I do want to remind that with the last meeting, we spent some time updating our regulation around character education. So we look forward to going deeper into what are the tenets or the components of these trainings and encouraging our board as well as our parents and our community to be partners with us in this process. So I think you'll be very pleased as we're kicking off next year. Any questions related to that piece?
Well, I have one, and that
Sure.
is, so Capturing Kids' Hearts now runs the gamut, right? It's consistent through all the grade levels?
Yes. Actually, a number of schools have had some version of Capturing Kids' Hearts training. For example, Lewis Palmer Elementary has actually utilized Capturing Kids' Hearts for a number of years. So it's not necessarily built into every school in that regard, but I think you'll see a lot of overlap and a lot of connections or similarities between both of these programming efforts. Responsive Classroom is a lot more driven toward really supporting the early childhood and primary and intermediate grades as far as that. That curriculum is really intended for an elementary audience, whereas Capturing Kids' Hearts really does run the gamut.
So is Capturing Kids' Hearts going to be in the middle school?
Yes, that is our intent.
I have a question if possible.
Sure.
In just considering the climate of the hiring season and how much fluidity there is, what do you do with regard to new hires that will be brought on throughout the school year? How do you the component of continuity for these trainings with people coming in either between now and the beginning of the school year or mid-school year?
Yeah, as far as I understand it right now, and I don't have dates that I can quote to you right off the top of my head, but we will have a fall training opportunity for new or brand new staff. And there are other ways to ensure that these programs are implemented even if individual staff members who are brand new may not have the training right out of the gate. So it's something that is embedded into professional development and other ways of ensuring that those strategies and that school-wide perspective on how these programs are carried out is inclusive of both returning as well as new staff.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
One more question I have.
Sure.
Sources of strength. Which buildings is that? Is that still just the 2 high schools?
Yes, it's primarily a high school-based 9 through 12 program. So you'll see evidence of that at both LP and PR. Okay, I'm going to keep on moving through our presentation. So oh, Vicki, I'm not sure it's letting me forward up there, if you don't mind. But you can follow along with me. So as you recall, we engaged in a middle of the year, around November, survey data using Panorama as our resource. And we have the data now that we can compare to from the end of year. So this was a survey that was facilitated late April, early May. Across grades 3 through 6 in an elementary space and grades 7 through 12 in our secondary schools. So what you see here is the overall results for elementary and the various components of that survey from engagement to sense of belonging, school climate, school safety, teacher-student relationships, and wellness. Something that is interesting is the trend at a national level, and this is through collaboration with Panorama, suggests that there is generally a decline in the spring survey window. So for a variety of different reasons, we're not necessarily the experts on all parts of how that survey necessarily is perceived. But you can see that at least in a couple areas, there was a small increase and then a relative stable performance from, again, middle of the year data to end of the year. I'm going to keep going through this because this is a very high level review. So at the secondary level, you see those same, it's still not doing it? Okay, that's okay. You see the same responses or same categories of responses with 3 categories with no change, a uptick in teacher-student relationships, and then a new question related to wellness that was introduced in the end of year survey window. Moving to slide 5, here's just an example or sample of some of those questions that you will see in each of those different categories. So again, thinking about engagement, particularly in classes, school climate, school safety. Moving to slide 6, sense of belonging, teacher-student relationships, and wellness. So as you also may recall, each school set specific goals within various categories that they desire to see improvement in. So there is a summary of what those goals suggested, those areas of focus were. We didn't get into all of the numbers for you today, but we just wanted you to have a sense of the alignment between our district-wide goal in terms of engagement and belonging and other areas, and how those correspond to each specific school. So I'm moving through those pretty quickly here. Not going to read every one of those to you. So moving into slide 11, essentially what you'll, and I mentioned this earlier, you'll see that the national trends do show a decrease in spring administration. We're sensitive to the fact that these are assessment results that do reflect one point in time and reflect obviously the perceptions of our students. And this, as another reminder, is our first year administering with the Panorama platform. I think what you will hear, and we didn't do this today to invite principals forward to talk about this, but speaking on behalf of what the conversations are that they are having with their staff and with students, and really with their community, is that the process for how we are looking at how important climate and culture of a school really is to the success and the well-being of the kids as well as our staff, is that there's a process that's really unfolded within each school, and that's what they find most meaningful. You could make an argument that the data points themselves, while informative, are not necessarily the sole driver for the types of efforts that are being implemented within these different areas. So I do think that warrants for us an opportunity to go deeper as we kick off into the 22-23 school year, because I think what would be really helpful for our community is to understand, how does this come off the paper, so to speak? How is this more than just the data point, and how is it living in each and every student's experience? So those are just some additional considerations that we wanted to place in front of you.
Before you leave that slide,
Yep.
I had a couple questions
Please.
here. And these all come from your discussion points, and that is, one, it would be of interest to know, are these surveys done at each school on the same date, or do they have their own unique dates?
We create a window. So it's usually about a 2-week open to close session. Each school then has the ability to administer those tests in whatever process is most advantageous for them. So for example, I can tell you that is actually a challenge when it comes particularly to high school right now. I will just give you a small example and let you know that Palmer Ridge, which does not have really a set place where these surveys naturally belong, is implementing, I think you may recall, their bear time that they will be putting into their schedule next year. So this would be a survey that more than likely will be something that will be administered within that block of time, within whatever that survey window is. So yes, there are definitely survey administration parameters that are unique to each school.
And I believe it might be meaningful if we saw that time frame in November and the time frame in, when were these done, in April or May?
Late April, yes, sir.
Yeah, that would be helpful, just to know
Okay.
what those time frames are.
Sure.
And then the second point I wanted to ask about was, you had alluded to how the principals are using this within their sites. I think it would really be helpful if we could hear from those principals a little more depth than this presentation, if possible, in the future.
That actually, they would welcome that. I would also probably allude to their desire to include some student voice in that process, as well as some of their key staff members that help lead this initiative.
Excellent.
When you were doing these surveys and we're looking at the responses at the secondary level and at the elementary level, and then each building has their school goals. Is there a way to find just how each school, if they're on track with their goals, if there's room for improvement, or they're feeling, each building is different, so I'd be curious to see what each building shows.
Yep, short answer is yes, and again, I think that echoes what we were just referring to in regards to not just the data point themselves, but then how are they going about implementing strategies and systems that are really intended to be what we desire for each student or staff member in terms of that experience. So, yep,
Cool.
that'll be something we dive deeper into next year.
Casey,
Sure.
is there a continuing contract with Panorama? What are we looking at in terms of the future and number of years that we might be surveying?
It's a great question. We are actually exploring moving away from this contract, and we've not made that a final decision as of yet. But what I can tell you is some of the feedback that we've received is that the tool may not be serving our community in a manner that's consistent with the investment. The other thing that I will tell you is that we believe this year, when we first started this contract, part of what we were concerned about was our internal capacity to manage our own internal survey tool. And since this time, we've learned a lot. And we've also learned that we do have more capacity than what we may be giving ourselves credit for. So there's a really good chance that we're going to move to a more in-house administered survey. The only thing we would lose in that transition is the national norm, which I can tell you, without going into a lot of detail, there's definitely cause for debate as to the value of what that norm actually gives us. And again, I would harken back to the fact that we've got professionals who are very committed to what is needed to create and cultivate the type of experience that we believe our own survey tool could help us assess with more value than what we're currently receiving through the use of this tool. So that's just a long-winded answer to say we're more than likely moving away from this.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you.
To piggyback off of Teresa, is there I'm sure there's a possibility we can find through open source trends, national trends.
There is, and there would be similar questions that we would obviously still maintain in order to create a year-over-year type of a comparison. But we also believe there's some certain questions that are just weirdly or badly phrased in Panorama, plus just even the survey index, as far as the way it's constructed, it's somewhat misleading at times, or it just doesn't necessarily give you the type of information that we think is most actionable or most relevant to our particular context. So again, all sorts of considerations. We will obviously be deliberate about how we round the corner into next year, and ensure that as part of our bigger conversations around this topic, we'll let you know exactly how we plan to measure and assess, because it is very important to have data to help guide these decisions and conversations.
Well, I appreciate that you're also assessing it. Does it really fit the needs of our school district system and community? So I think I applaud that we're looking at it saying, is this a good fit for us? And what can we do better on our own?
Precisely. Yep, thank you. Anything else on that conversation? There's one more slide that I know Mr. Frampton wanted to include, and that is our discipline data from the 21-22 school year. Two data points specifically that we just wanted to elevate. One of those is, you may recall, our decision to include a vape educate program, and this is primarily at our secondary campuses. So we're pleased to share that 41 students have accessed this program since implementation. We are seeing a reduction both in suspensions related to vape use, and we're getting some really good qualitative feedback, at least in terms of the substance abuse education component of this program. So I do think that represents a positive step in the right direction. I don't think the issue is completely resolved by any means, but it's an given some of the frequencies that I think represents a step in the right direction. And the last thing is we wanted to elevate where we've been with expulsions this year. And this, I'd like Mr. Frampton actually to be here to process through a little bit further. This was his first year assuming the role of student services in addition to exceptional student services. And we have remarkably had a very, I know 7 may still feel like 7 too many, but 7 incidences that have warranted expulsion represents a significant decline from where we've been. Now, we didn't have a whole lot during the COVID years, but pre-COVID, this was a double-digit number. And what I'm really pleased to share is that in this process, we had all 7 of these expulsions accept our deferral option, which means that we've been able to, in each individual case, work with the student and their family to really re-establish expectations and norms that are enabling these students to still pursue their education in whatever way, shape, or form that takes on. What I can share here is that ultimately this is a success. This is something that we believe represents more proactive work at the school level, but when the situation needs to escalate to this level, we're finding ways to include the restorative component, looking at the needs of the whole student. As you can appreciate, there's a lot of different dynamics that may go into any one of these individual situations, and to not have situations where the situation is exacerbated, again, it's just a celebration that we wanted to elevate. So, yes.
I have a question about that. And
Sure.
It's really maybe unrelated. So I understand the expulsions, and this is a discipline data. What about dropouts? Do we track that? And do we know?
We do.
Where does that get reported? Is that part of this?
That would represent more of an academic data point that is not technically tied into our discipline report. So that's certainly data that we can speak to as we have graduation statistics, et cetera. In many situations, and our rate is extremely low, like it's in the less than 1% category in terms of dropout. But what you'll often see for students who may not be graduating on time and within 4 years is that there's an extended opportunity for them, whether that's a year 5 or in some cases they can go year 6 or year 7. So that's something that wouldn't necessarily speak to just this domain, but certainly we're happy to share more of that detail with you as well.
The thought I have is one way or the other, they're not getting their education, right? The full benefit of it.
That's one of our biggest concerns anytime we're dealing with a major discipline issue is what is the impact, certainly from a safety perspective and other components, but what is the impact academically to that individual student? Absolutely.
Any other comments or questions, Teresa, on this priority 1?
No, I don't have any other comments or questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Tiffany?
Nope, that was
All
great
right,
information.
let's jump to priority 2 with Amber Whitstein and a world-class education. Welcome.
Thank you.
How's that computer, Vicki?
I sought some tech support, and he just suggested we open them each individually,
Okay,
but that, yeah.
thanks.
Good morning.
Morning.
I am happy to provide you an update on our end-of-year assessment results this morning. If I can figure out how to advance the slides. There we go. So to start, a reminder about the purpose of some of the assessments that we give to our students. Today I'll be speaking specifically to our early literacy assessment, which is Acadience, formerly known as DIBELS. We are required to give that assessment to our kindergarten through 3rd grade students 3 times a year, and then to track their progress throughout the year in their early literacy skills. That test is designed to help us predict what future success for each student would look like. So it's a little bit different than a standards-based assessment, which is what we use our MAP assessment for. So that assessment begins mid-year kindergarten, and then we assess 3 times a year, beginning in 1st grade, for all students through 8th grade. So those are the 2 assessments I'll be talking about today. We will have our state summative assessments, which are our CMAS and our College Board assessment results over the summer, and we'll be providing an update early in the next school year to you on those results. So here are our Acadience reading results for both kindergarten and first grade. And you can see that students who are well below benchmark are noted in the red, the percentage of students below benchmark in yellow, at benchmark, where they need to be for future success, is indicated by the green bar, and then above that mark are the students indicated in blue. So you can see at the beginning of the year in kindergarten, the percentage of students in each of those performance categories, and then you can see that we made significant gains with students by the end of the school year. Similar results in first grade.
Can I ask a quick clarification question, Amber? The two bars, are they two different subjects?
The two bars, the top bar represents the beginning of the year and the percentage and number of students scoring within those performance bands at the beginning of the school year. That window was right at the beginning of the school year when those students were tested. And then how the students performed in May is the second bar.
I see it. Thank you so much for the clarification.
Okay, and then
Before you go on, though, what is yellow? It's just below?
below where they need to be for predicted future success. So it's a little bit different assessment. It looks at skills that students need to become readers. So things like identifying letter names, letter sounds, how quickly they can
But yellow would suggest something different than red. Red is alarming in my mind. Yellow is like they're just a little behind. Is that a reasonable way
It
to think
is
of
that
it?
they are still at risk, and we need to provide interventions to those students, and we do, to make sure that we're catching them up. The students who are scoring in the red band have much more significant deficits, and we apply more intensive support for those students. Sometimes those students have unique needs. They may be receiving special services through special education. Sometimes they may be English learners, but not always.
And if it's green or blue, that's just results. There's no extraordinary effort being expended. It's just normal.
Right, they're on track, and but we're always monitoring student performance, so we don't want to ignore those students. We're tracking and making sure that they don't slip behind, and we also want to be encouraging our students who are performing above grade level, so to speak, to continue to challenge themselves. So we might be applying
get bored.
additional challenge for some of those students.
Excellent. So to summarize then, this is aggregate reports, but we're tracking every child.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question to that? So when I look at these numbers, and let's just take grade K, for example. The beginning of the year, 51 or 52 at 14% versus end of year 6%. What is the 52 and the 22?
That is the number of students that make up that percentage. So district-wide, at the end of the year, 22 students district-wide in kindergarten were still performing in that at-risk category.
And then the blue numbers is the total number of students we have
That were tested.
in kindergarten.
Correct. So you can see we had more students join our district throughout the school year, which is why those numbers are typically a little larger at the end of the year. Good questions. Our results match national norms or are exceeding those, and you can see that in how our students progressed throughout the year. So this visual is a goal setting tool that we use, and each school, this is district data, but each school also sets goals similarly. And all of our schools set goals for each grade level to at least make average progress or above. And you can see for the students who were in the green band or above, so students who were already performing where they needed to, we still grew those students either above or well above what would nationally be expected. So that's a great celebration.
Chris? Sorry. Sorry, Amber.
That's okay. Do you want me to pause till we get back? Yeah.
Teresa, I'm going to try and add Matt.
Okay, no problem. I'll be here.
Hi, this is Matt.
Hey, Matt, it's Chris. I'm going to add you to a group call with Teresa in it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Teresa, can you still hear us?
I'm here.
And Matt, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Okay, then we also set goals for students who were not performing at benchmark.
I'm sorry. I just want to get Matt up to speed. So, Matt, we're on, let's see, it's C2. It's the Learning Services update with Assistant Superintendent Amber Whitstein. And we're on slide 4.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you, Amber.
So these would be the students that were scoring in that red performance range. And you can see that compared to where students would typically grow nationally, at the district level, we also grew those students either above or well above the expected rates. Okay, now we'll transition to our measures of academic progress, or our MAP assessment. This test...
Before we transition, so essentially all goals were met in the Acadians.
All goals from a district perspective were met, and we do have work that we analyze data at each school, and there may be specific grade levels or classrooms that we need to provide additional support.
Or individuals.
So yep,
it's Acadians, is that right?
Acadians, correct.
Okay, thank you.
So the MAP assessment is a standards-based assessment. So it looks at how students are progressing on the content in both reading and math that students should master at each grade level by the end of the school year. You'll note the asterisk by kindergarten. As I mentioned earlier, we start assessing kindergartners at the middle of the year. So this data shows kindergarten from middle to end, and the rest of the grade levels from beginning to end of year. These first slides, this one is notating reading achievement, and you can see that how our students performed. These are percentile ranks. So as compared to the performance of students in the same grade level nationally, at the middle of the year in kindergarten, we were at the 74th percentile and increased to the 87th percentile, or better than 87% of districts nationally by the end of the year. And then as you look at each grade level, you can see how that performance changed, noting that there was a slight dip in 4th grade, 6th grade, and 8th grade. Not significant, but we are digging into that data to look at specifically what were those skills that maybe students should have learned that they didn't, so we can adjust our instruction and make sure that we are continuing to improve achievement throughout the year.
A question here, and that would be, so in this snapshot, it's this current year. So our 5th graders this year, do we have their 4th grade results, their 3rd grade results, their 2nd grade results, their 1st grade results? So I could see a trend as they progress through the grades.
We could pull that data. We would be able to
Is it
access
meaningful?
It is. We're using this data currently with principals and teacher teams to start planning goals for next year. So we had just recently a great conversation with elementary principals where they were digging deeper into this data to look at if they had a grade level, maybe we'd look at third grade that wasn't quite as high as second and fourth, and they're looking carefully to see which groups of students still need support as they go into fourth grade and beginning to plan those supports for them.
And then the eighth grade is on the lower end, and it declined. Is there some understanding around that?
We are digging into that currently to try to understand that.
Okay.
We're also thinking about some specific supports for middle school specifically on additional training on the curriculum that we provide, additional coaching. We have some positions that will be supportive through our grants that we've attained that will be able to support and provide additional modeling and feedback to teachers moving into next school year.
So a very complex response to my simple question.
That is correct.
Because it's a complex matter.
It is a
right?
complex matter.
Thank you.
Okay, so here are our math results. Again, kindergarten is mid-year to end of year, and the rest of the results are beginning of year to end of year results. And you can see that we made gains in almost every grade level, with the exception of a very slight dip in seventh grade. Still very high achievement levels, even in seventh grade, we're scoring almost at the 90th percentile nationally.
I was noticing that's a huge growth in second grade, 59 to 83.
Yes, it's great. We had lots of great celebrations here.
Right.
And not only are we digging into maybe where we didn't meet goals that we wanted to, but also trying to identify bright spots in which teachers maybe had greater success than others so we can learn from them and replicate those efforts.
And that was both reading and math on those
Correct.
growth scores.
Yep. Okay, a little bit different look at the MAP results. These are the amount of growth that students are making versus the achievement level. So the diamond represents where nationally students would have been expected to grow. And you can see in most cases we are hitting that mark, and we do have some areas that were similar to what we saw with the achievement levels, where we need to look closely at making sure every student is growing the equivalent of a year academically.
Amber, can I ask you to clarify when you speak of growth versus achievement levels, can you clarify the two different terms real quick?
Yes. So the achievement would be the level that students are scoring compared to how students nationally are scoring at that grade level on the content that they need to learn for that grade. When we look at growth, we're looking at where a student begins the year, and based on a formula, there would be a prediction of how much they would need to grow to keep up with the peers who were scoring at similar levels. So again, it's kind of complex, but I hope that makes sense. Okay.
To me, it does, yes.
So while we may have very high achievement levels in some cases, we still need our students to grow, even if they're already performing at the 80th or 90th percentile. We want them to continue to grow, even if that's above what may be expected for their academic grade level.
Can I make a couple observations and you can tell me if I'm in the ballpark or
Sure.
not? So first is our eighth grade seems to be, the growth rate there seems to be less than national norms, similar to the achievement levels. But I also noticed that K1 and then 2, the growth it's just much higher because they're absorbing so much, right? I mean, it's just that age when they learn a lot. Does it make sense that we would, instead of introducing foreign language in high school when it's later in their learning effort, introduce foreign language earlier in the cycle so that they could actually become proficient in a foreign language instead of conversant, perhaps? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think that's a longer, probably, conversation.
It's okay.
and
That's
yeah.
okay. Yeah, and I know
But I-
there's costs, and I understand the complexity of the question, but that assumption on my part makes sense, that if we're going to do foreign language or things that we introduce later in high school or college even, certain things, it would make sense to start at a younger age. And is foreign language an example of that?
I think there's a lot of research on starting language development early. And there's also research that unless it's very often and consistent that students are exposed to language, that students make less gains. But I would be happy to provide more information about that moving forward.
But generally speaking, that assumption on my part isn't too far out in left field. It's a reasonable assumption.
I think it's reasonable. Do you have anything you want to add, Dr. Summers?
I mean, it's right. It's something that I think we would have to be very intentional about contemplating what that type of programming and that type of intended impact would be seeking to achieve. So it's definitely worthy of additional exploration.
Well, we talk about world-class education, and we live in a world that speaks other languages than English. And so that's the reason for my question is, in the U.S., or having lived outside the U.S., I think in some respects the American education system, fails students in that global aspect, if you will, of language. I mean, in Europe, they learn 5 or 6 languages from the early ages.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I understand usage matters, et cetera. I mean, I understand the complexity of the question. I'm trying to highlight.
Well, and it speaks a little bit to, not that we're making intentional connections through this presentation to our portrait of a graduate, but when we think about the graduate, we're not just thinking about the student that's at the tail end of their educational experience. So what are those experiences really from an early childhood perspective all the way through that continuum? So I think it's well worth the investment of time, and what are those implications, and what might be our next steps around some of that.
Yeah, and it's probably a longer term planning,
Sure.
obviously, but it's just something that struck me as where it's an area of weakness in the U.S. education system. I think it's an area of weakness.
And just to add one other piece, which maybe anchors this back to anytime we're looking at aggregate data, how do we also make sure that we're attending to each of our students that represent what that total data point is? So to your point about where we may still have room, where we're not meeting that expectation, it's critical that we go closer into that. As an additional point, how are we addressing students who may not be currently meeting expected growth from whatever grade level that they were in this year to the next grade level? So those are conversations that I think we're having at a high level. How do we have those really down to the level of each individual student, family,
And
how teachers approach that, et cetera?
I would really be keen in understanding how our community felt about this. So when we do these surveys and
Sure.
engage and elevate sessions,
Sure.
it would be nice to hear from our community their thoughts around this type of a question, right?
That's actually a nice preview. There was some good dialogue that we had at our sessions that did speak to some of this. So appreciate you making that connection as well.
We're almost, well, I'll hold off until we get to questions.
Okay, okay, so the final data slide notates our growth in math, and you can see, again, we are meeting expectations for where students should be growing in math, and just a slight concern with 7th grade here, but we are meeting the mark there. So I've talked a little bit about next steps and how we're supporting schools and digging into this data deeper to identify specific students that may need additional support or challenge. But we'll also be continuing to implement our professional learning communities into next school year. And thank you for providing that additional time for our secondary schools to have time to look at data and to plan for student instruction. We'll also be utilizing the Learning Services team to support schools with data review and analysis, as well as the instructional coaching that I mentioned earlier. And we'll be leveraging many grant opportunities, from the literacy grant to the MTSS grant that Student Services is managing, as well as our connectivity grant with the additional Chromebooks for students and additional coaching through those funds that we've received in addition to our ESSER funding. And I'm happy to entertain additional discussion and questions.
So, Chris, I had a question that you brought up a point that made me the cogs started turning. Do we currently post on our website anywhere a scorecard that shows if somebody's moving to our school district, or somebody's curious, how are we doing? And they can go to the website and say, oh, look, here's this information that's right here on our board docs, but is it easily accessed anywhere on our district website?
I would say that for the past couple of years, we haven't had consistent data to post, but moving into next school year, we should have that. So you will remember the school performance frameworks that we annually receive. They mention dropout rates, all of these assessment scores, and so that parents can see how we're performing compared to other districts. And we can certainly make sure that those are posted in a way that parents and community members can easily access them. We'll be receiving those late summer, but we haven't had those in quite some time due to the pandemic and inconsistent results.
Well, and the reason I ask is I love this idea of making this part of an engage and elevate discussion, but also helping people to understand so that they don't just come in and go, I don't know anything about this, but that they've had an opportunity to look at it and preview it and absorb it, and then have genuine dialogue surrounding our data.
And I'll just add a real quick plug that is something that we desire to do, both with respect to academic achievement and growth data, as well as where we are positioned with our strategic plan, various measures and milestones that we can report out on, and do so in a way that's a nice at a glance or a snapshot, or however much detail you want to go into. So that is something, actually we have a meeting on Thursday that's exploring the use of a tool to help us do more of that. So it's a great connection there, Ms. Upchurch.
And I have a question to follow up on what Tiffany asked about, and that is, doesn't the Colorado Department of Education website have growth and achievement data by school district? And you can actually go in and compare districts to one another, like the financial transparency?
It does, except not for the past couple of years, but moving forward, we expect that will all be reinstated.
And is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
And then we would just have links on our local site to our particular district?
Yes.
Or would you just go to the Colorado CDE website?
I think we could think about just how to make it most accessible for families so they don't have to look for things. But just to piggyback what Dr. Summers was commenting on, we could certainly provide additional information like what I presented this morning in addition to those state assessment scores.
That'd be very good.
Matt, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Taylor. Thank you.
Teresa?
No questions here. Thank you.
Tiffany, anything else?
No, I this was great information. I would just add also that when we talk about it in DAC, but when we talk about the Acadians and MAP and CMAS and being able to have a quick snippet when somebody's looking, what does that mean? What does that measure? So that's good information to share out as well.
Thank you, Amber.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amber.
Our next priority is value our people. Priority 3, Chief Human Resources Officer Kristen Stuber.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's nice to see you. So priority 3 update. I am going to, there we go. Just give you an overview of what hiring has looked like this year. We've hired approximately 70 teachers and 21 classified employees since hiring season started, which is mid-March. Probably what's more important here are the current vacancies that we have. First of all, I want to just mention that they do fluctuate. I received a message this morning that one of our counselors just retracted her acceptance due to pay. And we have 3 additional paraprofessional openings that we didn't have yesterday. So I just want to let you know that this does fluctuate daily. It's very fluid. We've encountered many, many challenges in this hiring season, and most of those are due to compensation. The applicants that we've seen for positions is sometimes 0, sometimes 1 per position. So it's been extremely difficult to fill. An example, at Lewis Palmer High School, they went through 3 rounds of interviews to hire a social studies teacher. And in years past, that has not been a difficult content area to fill. So they went through the process, it was declined due to pay. Went through the process again, the second candidate declined to pay, the third declined to pay, and then the 4th accepted. So I just want to give you some context as to what that looks like. The number of applications, we had a position posted classified, and that position is a bookkeeper. They have not had 1 applicant for that position. So even though we've instituted a bonus, that is still not closing that gap, if you will. So really, this is really alarming, and going into the summer, we have an unusually high number of vacancies. So I just want to give you that context.
Kristen, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Typically, when we're going through the interview process, in years past, that when you referred, actually, I think it's probably a more complicated question to answer than do we usually see more or less applicants?
So in years past, I've been doing this for a long time. It's very typical, or at least in years past, that we would see a large number of applicants. We could have 50 for an elementary position in years past. We just don't have those numbers. It might be a handful, and then the principal may have 1 candidate that they are really interested in.
Thanks.
So,
Can I just extend just a
Sure.
stitch? So one of the challenges that we're encountering as a result is that we may have a multitude of openings. Let's say it's a elementary teacher position across 3 or 4 of our schools. Typically, we've got 1 applicant that is applying to 3 or 4 of those schools. So we're fighting a little bit with, not fighting, but we're having to contend with an opening across multiple campuses. And to compound that, typically that's an applicant that is also pursuing positions in other districts. So what we have found, while we have seen more recently some success that maybe we didn't have right out of the gate, certainly we are excited about the folks that we have brought on, and we feel like we've actually made some very nice hires as we're moving into next year. These numbers are definitely making us nervous. So there is a need for us to continue to full court press, if you will, our efforts toward recruiting and attracting candidates. To Kristen's point, the incentive is helpful. By itself, it may not be enough. One of the things that we are really trying to appeal to these candidates on is the culture. With respect to where we sit as a district, as well as the individual schools, our principals are doing a great job of their own internal marketing efforts. I think what we are often hearing from a lot of people is, I would love to work with you. However, it may not be feasible because of any number of reasons, or we eventually find a way to attract them enough to where they are making perhaps a compromise on being paid more, and still deciding to come to a system that is highly desirable nonetheless. So those are just factors, and those are contextual pieces that are just important for us as we're thinking about not just the compensation challenge, but how this represents a workforce challenge that we are not unique in. Every district is going through this right now. And I can tell you that this data is symbolic of multiple systems. So again, these are things that we'll continue to make sure that we're reporting on and sharing our updates and progress with you. But if we're in August and we have a number of vacancies still, that will certainly have some significant impacts that we're going to have to be prepared to address. So lots to do.
And I would say, as far as license, the hiring season is really March through May, and then it kind of drops off. So typically, when it comes to new students who are graduating, individuals from other districts who are wanting to make a change, it's typically in that time frame. When you have classified positions, those are typically late July, early August is really when that starts to pick up. I had a teacher, in talking about that culture, I had a teacher who actually accepted a job because I had called her on a Sunday, or I'm calling and leaving messages on Friday night. So they understand that we care and we will support them when they get here, and the size of our district is beneficial to them. So those are just some other comments that I've heard.
So, excellent presentation on the problem. Let's jump. I need to just,
Sure.
as a matter of time here.
Yep.
So if we could jump to your slide 4,
Sure.
which kind of gives a composite view of where the market is, where we are. And that's the market. Across the bottom there is the various roles, I'm thinking, right?
I think that's the classified position view. Kristen, you're a little bit ahead.
Yeah.
So if you can go back one or two.
Okay, so the blue is where Lewis Palmer is.
Can you scroll it back?
Okay.
There you go.
No,
Scroll it back again.
Oh, there we go.
No, you're going 4. There you go. Back to 4. There it is. Not that one, the next one.
Sorry.
There it is.
Okay.
So what this shows is at the certain roles, these are just roles across the bottom, right? So some
Correct.
were way out of line, some were not so far out of line, some were above, right? That's sort of what that says.
Sure.
Can we go to the next one then? The next graph, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So in this graph, this is certified again, and
Yep.
now what I'm seeing here is we have 4 brackets, if you will, and we have various school districts. We have a mean. That mean is that the same as the average?
Yes. Really, this slide is more depicting kind of where we fall in relation to other districts as far as the BA entry. Although we've increased our salaries by 6%, we're still well below.
Right, that's where I was headed. Kristen, thank you. So the mean, the line that's bold at the bottom, that's a mean of all of our peer school districts, right? And then right below that is us. And so in the first column, the mean is 41,584 annual, and ours is 37,132, correct?
We actually raised that to 38,830 for this upcoming year.
Well, I would suggest updating the slide then, but the point being is that's the difference here, correct?
Kristen, this was the data, same data that was collected based on 21-22. So it has not been updated from the consultant presentation. It was just as a reminder that this was the starting point.
Which is really good to understand, because when we get later, here, next steps, that impacts the analysis later.
Correct.
But what I'm seeing here is, in this particular one, this is certified roles, and you've got 4 different brackets. Across the board, we're under by 10.7, 10.5, -6, -8.8, which is, again, reflective of the earlier slide we saw.
Yes.
So the point being is we have, as we compare Lewis Palmer School District 38 to our peer group, which is, how many are there in there? 10
There's
or
10.
10? 10 other school districts were below the average, the mean. Okay, so that's on certified. And then you have another slide that just kind of shows it in a different view. Let's jump to the next slide, which is now, or that, excuse me, that last one was classified. This is now certified. Here we have 1, 2.
Actually, Mr. Taylor, sorry to stop you. What that slide depicted was the entry point. So our teachers with bachelor's, it was our certified grouping. This is the next level of the salary schedule for teachers that have master's and above. So again, still certified staff in that regard.
I know it would be good to define that in the presentation, if we could. But let's go to the next slide, I'm sorry. I think I'm on the same one. So the first column here, again, we got our 10 districts, we got the mean. The mean's 45,803. We're at 40,809, which is 10.9% less. And again, that doesn't reflect any changes that we've added based on the upcoming budget.
Correct.
But if we go across there, we're worst case 14.5% under. Best case, we're at 6.5
Correct.
under across the board.
Correct.
So, and then, or do you guys want to add anything to those 2 slides? Because those are the ones I zeroed in on to kind of see where are we? Because then we start going from, you stated the problem, and that problem is universal in the country, not just in the state. But then we have this issue now of how do we compare to our peer groups?
Mm-hmm.
And we've got the 2 groups. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, it also varies depending on where you are in your career. So for those individuals who are close to retirement or looking at an exit, that gap narrows for that group. And it truly depends on the cell as to the percentage. So we look at lanes and steps. So lanes are the educational level, and the steps look at experience.
I think the best way to summarize how we're approaching this dynamic is, while we have alluded to, on average, a 10% gap, when you think about all teachers across the system, we recognize through this analysis that is also representative of a variety of gaps that you're seeing. So when you look at the average compensation based on the data that was used on 21-22 data, which has changed both for us as well as other districts, we just want to make the point that 6% does not cover the gap that we are trying to address, that we are still dealing with a variation of that gap as it plays out across the salary schedule. So there's just different dimensions to that. The next series of slides go into a little bit more in terms of those numbers.
And even though I mentioned earlier that our numbers haven't been updated based on our current upcoming budget, neither have the other districts.
Exactly.
So
correct.
we don't know really that this is the best that we have in true comparison.
Correct.
Okay, so I don't.
That's
That is
exactly right.
correct.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear there.
Yeah.
I didn't
Thank
want
you.
to lead you to think I thought something else. So I'm now looking at this D38 license to market.
Yep, that trend line, yep.
Is BA mean
Bachelor's.
Bachelor's degree.
M is master's? That's
That's
what that
correct.
means. Okay, I understand. And that's where you were basically saying the gap is much lower in the higher end here.
That's correct.
And then the overlay, take them through the next few slides there,
And
Kristen.
the trend line. So if you look at a bachelor's degree, you can see that that's 10%, more than 10% of a difference there. And our entry level is truly what brings new teachers in. So that 137 is the number just of teachers that fall on those steps. We look at the master.
Is it fair to say what that's saying is that entry level is our problem more than those who have been here with time, because the difference shrinks. So our brackets, as they exist today, do not favor entry level recruiting, but they do for the seniority or the people who have been here longer. The gap isn't as large.
That's correct. So when we go to the next slide and you see those that have a higher level of education, which is typically our folks that have been in the system for a while, and those that are looking to retire, you can see where that gap does narrow.
And I'd like to add one more thing, because I think this takes it from each respective bracket, if you will, and puts it into the larger context of, we cannot expect to close the gap by just saying, it's a 10% bump for everybody. We're going to have to revise our schedule. And by revising our schedule, we're going to have to take a more aggressive stance for our early career teachers in order to close that gap or get it to where it's more level, and maybe not do as much toward the lower right-hand end of our quadrant, if you want to look at it through that salary schedule lens. So it's not going to be equal.
But let me ask this question then.
Yeah.
When we talk about recruiting, is
Yes.
it the entry level that we're short on?
We're short well, it depends on what the qualifications or skills are that the individual's coming to us with. But for a brand new bachelor's level teacher, in many districts right now, they're coming in at around 43 to 45. And we're still coming in at 38. So that's part of the problem, big part of the problem. Yes, Ms. Upchurch.
So when I look at this, I'm looking at certified, which is the same thing as our licensed staff. It's our teachers.
Correct.
When I'm looking at the slide that Chris was on with the green, purple, yellow, I'm looking at a 14.5% gap with a master's at step 6. And then when I'm looking down at this slide where we're on, sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth. I
We're
apologize.
skipping around a little bit.
Yeah, so go back up to, I guess it's page number,
It's 8, Kristen.
yes, 8.
Thank you.
That one. So that shows that 14.5 with a master's step 6. That's a pretty big gap. And then when I look down and I go to slide number 12, the 2 points right in the middle there, that's a BA step 8. That seems like a wider gap to me than the very beginning. I wish I had a pointer, but the middle point,
If you go back to slide 6, that accounts for the gap that you're referring to. So it's 41,000 in our system, again, 21-22 data compared to 46,678. So that represents the 10% difference.
Okay, thanks.
6% when you move up to step 12. It's really difficult when you start comparing every salary schedule of the 10 districts to one salary schedule. So there is some combining and there's some different averaging that's actually taking place. But again, we know that there is a lot of work to do. If you think about our quadrant and really kind of draw a line right through it, the upper left-hand part of the quadrant is where we are most significantly behind. And it's not to say that we don't want to address the entirety of our salary schedule, but we're going to have to really prioritize that early career entry starting point.
Okay, understood.
And Kristen, that might get us, I think with your permission, you guys understand that concept? If we go to slide 15, we can kind of zoom in a little bit more on just holistic numbers.
So the financial impact overview, 47.6 million, includes the average of 6% of an increase, which roughly costs $2 million. In order to make a market adjustment, we're projecting that we would need 52.3 million, and that's based on a 6 to 15% increase. 2.4 to 2.8 million for our certified and 1.6 million for our classified. So that total difference is approximately 4.4 million.
So a question I would pose is, this calculation is based on the mean of our 10 chosen peer districts. Is that the right target?
I believe so. I believe the 2.4 to 2.8 gives us a little bit of flexibility to address the certain cells.
I'm asking about the mean. In other words, what we're aiming as a target. So this is the difference between our actual and the mean of 10 surrounding school districts. Is that the right target that we're aiming for?
So I'm going to add a different perspective. And I'll just use the starting BA step 1, lane 1, very bottom. If we're targeting 41,000 to move up to, that's not enough from 38. 38,830 to 41,000 is not enough. We are going to probably have to look at 43 to even 45. I think at some level, if we don't use a goal that identifies a reset, right? We're still not going to be at the highest level at 43 or 45, but if we go up to 41, we're still going to be behind. So I think that's just a different perspective. Holistic numbers, it's one thing, but it really gets to the core of how do we revise the schedule to create and draw more of a level playing field. We can't continue to have people look at Lewis Palmer and say, you are still 8th, 9th, 10th on the list. And 41, we would still be 8th, 9th, or 10th on the list. So that's my 2 cents on that.
So I think what you just said is no, the mean is not necessarily the right aim. It may be in some categories.
Agreed.
But it may not be in others.
Correct.
And so the qualitative analysis that we need is what you just described for one example.
And to take that a step further, that is going to involve some additional conversation with our staff, because what I think we risk seeing happen is I do not want to create a scenario or an environment where our staff are looking at this as, well, some people are winning and other people are losing, for example. What's the most equitable and what's the most competitive salary schedule that we can develop? And we have a salary schedule that is based on assumptions that were designed back in 2017, 2018, 18, 19, I think. Now is a really good time to revisit that.
But every employee is going to say, how does it impact me?
Absolutely.
You're not going to get away from that.
But I think part of what we're going to have to do is use some type of an approach to say, what were the assumptions that schedule was based upon in order to update and revisit those, absolutely.
Qualitative analysis.
Exactly.
By each of those brackets.
Correct.
And maybe even more than what I just said.
Yes, this will be,
Those brackets.
absolutely. There's a lot more work to do in that regard.
Okay, so I know this is a hot topic, getting to the next steps. So where are you in terms of your timeline and milestones to even get to the last next step? Based on this conversation.
If I may, could we forward that into priority 5? Because we have an opportunity to go to a little bit more into detail with that. Because I think there.
The question is specific to this.
Okay,
analysis
so.
And the qualitative, this is almost 100% quantitative analysis.
Correct.
I'd like to see the qualitative analysis added to it so we understand why the target is what it is.
And the simple answer to that is there's work that still has to commence over the course of the summer, and we're going to be very aggressive in how we're kicking off in the fall so that we can get to that additional level of qualitative analysis that you're suggesting. That's really the simplest answer.
Perfect. Any questions, Tiffany?
As we're going through this and we're looking at this data, all these data points and putting this together, and I'm looking at the Salary Schedule Review Committee, something I want to highlight and I appreciate and I hope we continue to do is that part of it is also the benefits of educating our students in D38 and what we can do that are soft benefits, so to speak. And an example would be the benefits we did for our substitute teachers, as an example, where we've just the different things we're doing. So when we're looking at this, I guess my question is, can we continue to also analyze and ask educators, what are other things you'd like to see? Because money's not everything. It's obviously important, and we've got to close that gap. But what else can we do in addition to?
Yes, and I would just
be more
connect
effective.
that question back to Mr. Taylor's, Ms. Upchurch, is that would be part of a bigger picture, comprehensive, qualitative analysis that speaks to both the compensation aspect as well as the culture aspects that make this an attractive place to work. Absolutely.
Anything else?
We will continue.
Anything else? Okay.
Good.
Teresa, anything? Any questions or comments?
Just one comment. I guess if I had to summarize this presentation, what I'm seeing is we have a significant enough pay gap in certified and classified staff, all levels of experience, entry to 20 plus years, and all degree levels, bachelor's to PhD, such that it's negatively affecting our hiring ability. Is that an accurate summation?
It is, but I might be the only one hearing you. Can you speak a little louder?
Sure, I'll try again. Can you hear me now?
Not yet. Not yet. Is she on speaker?
Maybe hit the speaker. There you go. I think that should
Try
be
it again now?
Yeah, my apologies. Can you hear me
weird.
now?
Not very well.
Is that mic on?
How about this?
Mic's working and it's both. It's working. She's on speak.
I lost them both.
Darn.
That's gonna be
Hey,
better.
Chris.
Sorry, Matt. Let me add Teresa. Oh, the sound, the volume
Yeah, it's
turned
weird.
down on my phone.
Well, we can hear Matt.
I'm here.
Oh, we hear you much better. Let me add Matt back. Are you there now?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, let's try it again. We hear you much better.
Okay, super. So I would just want to make a comment that, and just verify that my interpretation is accurate. So given that we have a significant pay gap across certified and classified, all levels of experience, entry to 20 plus years, and all degree levels, whether you bachelor's to PhD, the pay gap is significant enough that it's negatively affecting our hiring ability. Is that an accurate summation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It was perfectly said.
Thanks. I think that's just an important, sort of whole aspect for the community to understand as well. That quantitative, and that's the quantitative aspect, but that very much affects the qualitative aspect of our hiring when people are looking at us as a district as a whole.
Thank you, Teresa. I have one question. I've asked this in the past in a qualitative sense. Can we add a comparison of the burden? In other words, the para costs, the insurance costs. There's a lot of, it's not purely qualitative when we look at the burden. And the burden rate, I don't know how we compare to the other school districts, but that would be informative here. And it helps complete the picture.
Absolutely, we can add that to the level of analysis.
Anything else on this presentation? Kristen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move to C4, Fiscal Stewardship and Transparency. We just did this. Oh, wait. I'm just kidding. That was the budget.
We did shorten this one, so I don't know that we'll need a full 20 on this one. So,
Hello again.
Hi.
Okay, so priority 4, practicing fiscal stewardship and transparency. This is just a brief recap of some of the initiatives that we've undertaken this year. One big initiative was establishing the Financial Advisory Committee. Their kickoff meeting was in January, and they'll be meeting again later this week on the 9th. Their purpose is stated there, and they have broken into smaller groups to sort of elevate these initiatives, as you see on the screen there. So we're very thankful for that committee and hope that they can continue their good work into next year. That meeting schedule will be determined on Thursday's meeting.
Let me just so I fully understand you. 11 members present, plus 3 staff and 1 board. Does that mean there's 15 total?
That was just at the first board meeting, but those are our members.
Of the FAC,
with
right?
various attendance at other meetings.
and by staff, we're specifically referring to Kitty, CFO, Mark Belcher, and myself.
Okay,
So,
but you have 11, I'll say, community members.
11 community members. Of those, there are 2 that are staff members as well, but they're considered to be more at-large members. In addition to, then I think that leaves about 9 at-large community members,
Okay,
some of which are also parents.
thank you.
Okay. And this is just a recap of what is available on the financial transparency page of our website. These reports, the first 4 there, the first 2 are updated on a monthly basis after the financials are completed. We also post additional district-specific financial information. These are reports that are not required for us by CDE to have on our financial transparency, but we do find that our community members find value in those reports, so we've been continuing to post those there as well. This next subject is an overview of the audit findings from the 2021 financial audit. There were some challenges associated with the audit this year. I think a lot of that is due to some disruptions in the business services department. Turnover does lead to some loss of historical knowledge and standard operating procedures. So you'll see as I address each of the audit findings that the focus is mostly on how do we document it, what are we doing currently, and what do we need to do going forward.
If you don't mind, there's only one issue that was considered a material weakness, correct? And that's the treatment of those leases on the buses?
I couldn't say specifically which one was considered a material weakness. I could say that all of these findings were a first finding. Nothing was a repeat finding. However, several of them had been noted in previous management letters. And so I think it's important to document
All of
the
them.
actions
Yep.
to be taken.
Which I appreciate, but I do recall, I read that very carefully, and it is the capital leases. We had treated it as a lease, and we should have had a capitalized lease, and that's the change that the auditors said was a material weakness in our financial
Right,
reporting.
and part of what I'll do to address that is the first finding listed here. What I suggest is that the leases need to be kept in a central location. The documentation for all of our leases was kept with the financial transaction records. It wasn't readily available or accessible.
But but in the budget explanation, you have done, in other words, you're not recommending, you've done what you just said.
Right, it's important to bring those things into one central location, especially when turnover is being experienced, so that persons can readily get up to speed on what's happening with those types of transactions.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to point out that your budget presentation suggested to me that you've done what you just said we would recommend, it seems, right?
Yes, I think in addressing all of these findings, some of the actions that are recommended here are already in place, and others will be more relative to the financial audit for the current school year.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So that was the capital lease, the first finding. And then the property tax and specific ownership tax, this is not a repeat finding, as I mentioned, but it has come up in the past. I've reached out to colleagues of mine outside the district, and I've landed on a tool that I think will be beneficial to help clarify that reconciliation at year end. So I'll be working to get that in place. The reconciliation of grant revenue and expenditures, we have a new grant accountant on staff who's working diligently with learning services staff and doing her best to get up to speed on all of the grants that we have. We've made tremendous progress this year, and the requests for funds are happening more regularly, and I don't think we'll land with the same issue we had last year, which was we weren't able to get the requests for funds made in a timely enough manner to recognize the revenue in time. Accrued payroll, this is another area where I think it was just a matter of a tool that needs to be updated and a process that needs to be documented. This current fiscal year, we saw the calendar reset, so we want to pay specific attention to how that accrual is calculated, as it will look quite a bit different from prior years. We'll only be accruing 1 month rather than 2 in most cases. And then the interfund reimbursements, this activity, it's actually built into our accounting system to track this, and we've experienced some system failures in that regard. My current staff accountant is familiar with the process of reconciliation. I'm going to ask her to document it in more detail so that we have that clearly established going forward. And very similar to capital assets, the grant accountant's responsibility will be to, on an ongoing basis, review all transactions for equipment purchases. It will be their responsibility to add and delete those assets and calculate depreciation at the end of the year. Having 2 sets of eyes on that, with management reviewing that at year end, should resolve any further issues in that area. And that's all I have.
Excellent. One thing I would make note of it from a board level, everything you've described here, we don't see, right? We only see this because the outside accountants raise these issues. It might be helpful from a board perspective to actually see a variance analysis from the actuals. So here's what the budget was, and in a financial statement format. So here's our high level, whatever level of financial statement, because I know you can do multiples, but a financial statement, P&L, et cetera, right, the balance sheet, and show the variances from budget with an explanation. For example, the capital lease issue. If we would have seen that as a variance analysis, we would have recognized that it was wrong, right? But we didn't see it. But moreover, we might have asked the question, are we even handling it properly, right? The lease expense, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but was that lease expense budgeted as a lease expense in the first?
The lease payment was made. It was the initial recording of the financial transaction when the lease
When it wasn't
was
capitalized,
initiated.
essentially.
Yes.
Right. So I think if we'd have budgeted that properly, a variance analysis would have highlighted it. If we had budgeted it properly.
I think the lease payment itself was budgeted properly. The finding was around the recording of the financial receipt of the lease proceeds.
The value of the buses, the total
Right,
cost. Right.
And
But it
that's-
may have been, but the point I'm still making is, did we budget it as a capital acquisition?
No,
That's what I'm saying.
yeah.
So in the review of next year's budget, I want to make sure that we look at this issue, because we as a board should approve the budget not at a disbursement level, but as an accounting level. You with me? If there are any leases this year that should be capitalized for the upcoming budget, let's make sure we review that in our budgeting process. Because otherwise, we wouldn't have seen it either. Are you understanding
Yes.
my point?
Yes, I am.
I think the budget itself needs to be done as you would expect to report, not as you expect receipts and disbursements to occur. I think that's an oversight that's missing. And it may be on all of these, frankly. But I think that would be helpful, that we don't look at the budget as receipts and expenditures only, but we look at it from what's the proper accounting treatment in the budget.
Right, those unusual financial transactions that need additional thought process in the recording.
And to that degree, we as a board have some ownership here, right? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anything else that you wanted to add? I forgot to ask my fellow board members. Tiffany, any questions or comments?
No. I appreciate the financial finding with the corrective actions. I think that was important to see what's been identified and what the actions are is laid
Excellent.
out. That's excellent.
Matt, any question or comment?
No, wonderful presentation. Thank you.
And Teresa?
No comments. I just appreciate all the effort put into the presentation. Thank you.
Thank
Yep,
you.
thank
so
you very much.
You're welcome.
Awesome.
Our next item is C5, Community Relations and Communications Update.
Okay, sorry you get me again.
It
I'm
appears
gonna.
Dr. Summers is subbing.
Yeah, this is just my day. I'm going to do my best to be Mark. There's three subcomponents of this presentation. The first of which is a recap of our Engage and Elevate sessions. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Just stop me if there's anything that you need to bring up. So you have a picture on slide 2 when we were at Palmer Ridge High School. As you recall, we had a goal for deep listening, both from an executive team and a Board of Education perspective, with a goal of understanding what our community is both thinking and feeling. There were 4 sessions. Palmer Lake, Palmer Ridge, Kilmer, and Bear Creek were the hosts. The sessions averaged out at about 20 people per, with more than 50 individuals convening at Palmer Ridge. As you recall, those of you that were there, that happened to be on the same evening as a DAC presentation as well, so we think that had something to do with it. And beyond our website and social media channels, we also communicated these sessions to thousands of individuals via email, as well as advertised in local newspapers and other message boards. So, I'm sorry, there we go. Okay, thanks. Vicki, maybe you can just do it for me, because I'm trying to, yeah, thank you. Okay, so essentially 3 big bucket themes that emerged and some additional feedback that we wanted to capture and share as well. From the small group tables that were built into the session design, there was not a table that we experienced that did not touch on that priority 3 item, specifically relating to staff compensation and the general working environment. So there was definitely broad-based support for the district to potentially pursue an upcoming ballot initiative this fall, recognizing that there's still decisions and aspects of that to be made. And while there was definitely support, there was also an acknowledgement that there needs to be ample information and understanding of what the ask would actually entail. Next slide, priority 1. Many groups discussed social emotional learning, which we are also referring to as character education in D38. Community members seeking greater communication and understanding of what is utilized is resources in schools, which connects back to what we spoke about in Priority 1 earlier. Some of our community members pushing for greater mental health supports, and some community members pushing for greater opportunities and support specifically for students with disabilities. Next slide. Widespread support for the Portrait of a Graduate project. Community members appreciated the idea that students are empowered to do whatever their choice may be upon graduation or following, including a variety of pathways or journeying to higher education. So just general elevation of that concept, as well as support for additional quote-unquote portrait projects, including a portrait of an educator, portrait of a leader, portrait of our community, possibly even a portrait of a board member or a board as a whole. And then slide 7, as you know, this work situated within the greater context of our strategic plan. So there was definitely consensus about the plan being positive and a guiding force. For those that may have not heard about the plan, it was reassuring to know that we're guided by a plan in this work. And generally, there was also support for continued work on improving the plan, including branding, communication, and overwhelmingly, the use of data to communicate victories and benchmarks, which also connects to an earlier theme from this meeting. So you're seeing a lot of good connections to all of that. One more thing that I don't think Mark called out on the slide that just occurred to me was we created these sessions with the ability to have any small group or even individual dive in or hone in on any aspect of the plan as a whole. And we did receive some feedback that said it might be worth us pursuing future sessions related to one particular priority as opposed to covering them all at once. So that was just some good feedback that I think we need to conceptualize a little bit more. On slide 8, engaging and elevate themes, some of the written feedback that we received summarized. The format was a great hit with people appreciating small group facilitation to generate that conversation. So generally the session design was well received. Where teacher morale suffers, it has the potential to impact the morale and mental health of students. Taking care of our kids or students includes taking care of those who are educating our kids. I think very well said. Everybody needs to be involved in telling a consistent, truthful story about the challenges and victories that D38 experiences. We are a successful district, but acknowledgement that there may not be enough knowledge about the struggles that we actually face. Fourth bullet point there, dashboards with district information, including staffing, hiring, pay, strategic plan priorities may help our community stay apprised or appraised on how our district is performing. And last bullet, our community is beginning to see the district's commitment to transparency and openness, and there are always opportunities for growth in this and all other areas. And then slide 9, we appreciated one of our local residents who is a blogger, attended our Engage and Elevate, wrote about this event, saying it should be a model for the nation. As a community member of D38, I was enlightened and encouraged by the passion that was exhibited. Administrators, school board members, parents in the community are determined to fight the good fight for the district's children. In my opinion, the district scores in the 95th percentile. Actually, it's a pretty long blog if you ever get a chance to take a peek at it. There was several good connections there.
Where's that located?
It's that person's blog, that person's website. I can forward it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. And then I just wanted to lift up, and this will be something that previews a topic at the upcoming June 20th meeting agenda. D38 will be exploring merging the format of DAC and perhaps a rename or a rebrand of our District Accountability Advisory Committee with some additional opportunity for designing that group so that it can help leverage additional opportunities for community engagement and continued application of our efforts within our different priorities of the strategic plan. So that concludes the recap on Engage and Elevate. I'll just pause for a moment there, see if there's any additional follow-up. Sure.
I do have a comment. We talked about the idea of how we can use DAC as a touch point for our community with the different subcommittees that exist as arms of DAC that touch on all 5 of our priorities.
Yep.
But I also want to make sure that when I read this initially, I'm sure that's not the goal, but I want to make sure that we are not forgetting that District Advisory and Accountability Committee has some legal obligations to fulfill in reports to the DAC and DAC participation. So I just want to be mindful of that DAC will still function as it is intended legally.
We are very, very mindful of that as well. That is foundational. And yes, I think what you'll be pleased to see when we go into more detail on June 20th, that it's an enhancement, not a overhaul.
Right. I just wanted to.
Just my words.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that's clear.
We are very clear about that. Yes, thank you for reminding us. Anything else? Okay, admittedly, the next few slides here, I'm not as good as Mark at helping summarize this, but what I think we just wanted to reference so that you're aware is that we are continuing to prioritize ways, and we're calling this the D38 dispatch conversation. We desire for every member of our community, whether they are attached or engaged in a particular school environment, or perhaps they're not. But we want to make sure that we have outreach and that we are sharing information in a manner that ultimately gets to any member of our community. So what I think Mark is just summarizing here is that a broad community conversation concept is continuously adapting here. There was an initial concept of a quarterly communication that was going to be a small print piece that was distributed to all addresses in the district, and that rough cost was coming in at about $8,000 per distribution. Due to overall cost concerns, now we are exploring partnering with a firm that can help us reach most of our district's residents on a monthly basis via email. And so this is that adaptation, I think, in summary. iHeartMedia has access to contact 85% of Americans, and they will be able to help us reach most residents of our district over the next year. With the help of geofencing and targeting. I am not an expert on geofencing, so I hope you don't ask me what that is. So the plan, though, is essentially to, over the next 8 months, send a monthly newsletter with copious content to 46,000 adults in District 38, which is just about right for our population, and that cost is between $10,000 and $14,000. So we just wanted to share that.
So in lieu of snail mail at 32,000, you're going to do, and that's quarterly.
Yep.
You're going to try and do 8 monthly newsletters at a cost of about 14, or much less than half.
Correct.
Per year.
Correct. Thank you. That's a great summary. And then we're looking at how we continue to engage in communications with our community over the summer. So continuing to distribute our monthly D38 newsletters to our stakeholders. Just a quick plug on bullet number 2 about our upcoming July 4th celebration, which is in tandem with both our Palmer Lake Fun Run as well as the Monument Town Parade, as well as the Chamber of Commerce Street Fair. So you will see a D38 presence, and we are actually utilizing our administrative complex here in the parking lot to be able to showcase a variety of great things that are happening in our system, and having a little bit of a street fair feel. And then lastly, if D38 does move forward with a ballot initiative, our communications team will help provide that public with information around that. And what you see on slides 14 and 15, I'm not going to go into all those details, is just a sample of what some of that communication would consist of, keeping in mind that we are stressing the term potential, and that we are not going beyond the bounds of any fair campaign practice, because at this point an initiative has technically not been called. Just as a quick side note to that, the deadline for our decision about whether or not there will be something on the ballot would essentially be in August. And so I'm not going to go through that entire timeline with you, but it will line up with our first August meeting. And so we'll want to make sure that we are doing a lot over the summer to make sure that we're on track with what all that might look like. But I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that no formal action needs to be taken at least up until that point in time. Let's see. Okay, so that's slide 14 and 15. And then I actually have one more update, and I'll invite Chris up here just to speak to this particular point. We have an update on one of our community partnerships that's pretty exciting, and it involves both the facility utilization at Grace Best as well as our partnership with our Silver Key Alliance folks. So, Chris, go for it.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. To piggyback on what Dr. Summers just mentioned, we have a draft memorandum of understanding that has been through multiple revisions. I think we're on revision number 3 right now. Not that it's sort of creating multiple, but there's different names, different small changes that are occurring. But with the Senior Alliance organization, they have new leadership actually over there as well, and those folks are certainly involved in what is going on, have done a site visit over at Grace Best, but we are prepared to utilize, they are currently housed in a pre-engineered metal building, a couple thousand square feet over at Lewis Palmer High School. We will now be able to utilize that particular facility for some Lewis Palmer High School curriculum activities. They have learning, their engineering program and learning by design. They're going to utilize both that facility as well as the parking lot and be able to do so in such a manner that they'll be able to continue to use outdoor activities at Lewis Palmer High School. So it is advantageous associated with the curriculum aspects at Lewis Palmer High School. We do anticipate that the Senior Alliance folks are going to occupy 4 classrooms in Grace Best by the first weekend, permanently by the first week in August. They will begin the transition over on July 11, but we do anticipate that all the changes and the necessary accommodations, things that have to be rearranged, facilities to support science curriculum and those types of things, all have been arranged and designed and are all planned associated with the necessary logistics changes that are going to occur. But we are, I have conversations with Melissa over there pretty much daily, and we really see this as advantageous for everybody. There's going to be separate parking over there. We're going to rearrange the parking lot over at, not significantly, but just to accommodate the folks from SKSS that are going to be occupying the space on a basically on a regular basis, 7 days a week, is essentially what we anticipate. And then there are different things that have to be accommodated using our Google Calendar application for the other organizations that utilize that facility. Introductions are occurring right now with the transitions team and other folks and the principals and teachers that are utilizing that space, just so the left hand and the right hand know each other, know of each other, and know the various different expectations that one should have, so that we can all live and cooperate in a way that we see as productive. So just wanted to give everybody an update on that. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I have some questions, but I can shoot you an email.
Great.
But, so first of all, I think it's fantastic the partnership between Silver Key and the district of bridging the young and the old, so to speak.
Lots of opportunity.
What classrooms are going to be used at Grace Best?
All those classrooms are noted in the agreement. It's just 4 classrooms. I don't know if you're familiar with, I've been over to Grace Best, but it's in that sort of that first hallway, just right off the sort of the reception counter. The first hallway to your right, there are 4 classrooms over there. The bathroom accommodations and things that are going to be utilized are actually going to be out in the main corridor, because we have the bathrooms that are a part of that corridor are sort of hardened and sort of locked off, associated with asbestos accommodations and things that we just don't need to be into those particular spaces. But all that has been arranged, and all that's been a part of the conversations as well as the walkthroughs that I've had with that organization so far.
These aren't classrooms that are currently being utilized. Well, they're utilized for storage purposes we are moving, what is it, 2 with the science kits?
Correct. Well, exactly.
But these are not classrooms that are currently being utilized by either your transitions or HSEA. So they're underutilized classrooms.
Sure, but that wasn't the direction I was going. The direction I was going is that first hall, isn't that the hall that the Grace Best committee deemed was to be possibly, potentially in the future torn down?
That is part of the 1959 wing. So at some point, but not in the near future, are we having to look at what are we going to do with that portion of the building. But as of right now, there is no plan to do anything with it other than continue to utilize it to the extent that we're capable of utilizing it.
Okay.
And should that be something that is revisited at whatever point that is, then yes, that will be something that, and Silver Key is aware of that this is not anything that they're unaware of. The reality is the modular that they're in right now is actually in a lot worse shape. So this is actually an upgrade, if you will, for them for the time being.
Okay. Yeah,
They asked for it. they actually would, they actually suggested it back to me, so we were able to find a collaborative solution and worked very, very quickly to make that happen.
okay. Yeah, I can, and any other questions I have, I can
Please do.
simply forward. Okay.
Please do.
Thanks so much.
Chris, I have a question. So have you had a chance to look at the history and the more recent, maybe 2 years now, work that was done to look at this facility as a whole and how it fits into the district long term, what the recommendations were by our consultants, et cetera? Have you had a chance to really?
I have had the opportunity to sort of take a look at it. I am aware of what the consultants did and what they were commissioned to do. I haven't seen what their recommendations were. I have seen, for example, some analysis that would have occurred relative to, hey, this is what we want to do, but I am not aware of anything immediate associated with the use of Grace Best, other than an awful lot of people are sort of interested in utilizing the facility and continuing to utilize the facility to support any number of different opportunities.
Well, I'm going to do this from memory, but essentially there was a recommendation that Grace Best could be flexible in its utilization, but there is some work that needs to be done there still. And what I'm really interested in is what, I know you haven't been here forever, right? And I know that the geothermal took a little bit of your focus and time, but we need to have answers to the Grace Best situation. We haven't had these answers in the 5 years I've been here. We have all sorts of talk about it. The closest we got to direction was the latest work that was done, and I thought it was pretty thorough, and it had a lot of community feedback, more than any I'd ever seen, in fact. And we just need to really wrap our minds around what are we going to use that facility for. I'm glad when I hear you say there's lots of interest in it. Then what do we have to do to realize that interest so that it's a productive asset beyond its limited use of today?
No, I love what you're saying, Mr. Taylor. I think the ability to not necessarily a wholesale retrofit, other than sort of the accommodations to sort of abate, those various different things. If you are going to use it for a more full-scale educational type of facility, but for the uses that are currently interested, that being the SKSS, there are some other athletic rentals, leases for a relatively year-to-year type of relationship. They're not short-term. As well as sort of accommodations to be able to utilize that facility for the collaborative nature between the students and the seniors, for example. I think there are some strategic opportunities, whether it's sort of community gardens, community opportunities for teaching, as well as the robotics folks that are over there. I think there's some opportunities there to collaborate. So it's the ability to sort of put all that on paper, I think, is exactly the first step to sort of bring those minds, bring those interests together. And then sort of build sort of what we might think architecturally might be a better long-term solution for the facility.
And I'm not suggesting this is a requirement. I'm just raising the notion that, we use the savings in our utilities to pay for some security at 3 or 4 middle or elementary schools. And what are the utility opportunities of this asset that might pay for the work that needs to be done to bring it into a better situation?
I think that's a great
I
question.
don't know that it's possible, but it would be phenomenal if we could actually do this project next door without going to the community with an ask.
No, I completely agree. Getting strategic relative to the overall utility portfolio, building on what Schneider is doing as well as some other things that we're doing with Mountain View Electric. I think that, and having some type of facility strategic plan associated with the entirety of the district, understanding facility condition and where we are ultimately trying to arrive, in the next 2 to 3 year horizon, as well as sort of collaborating, with community conversation in that realm. I think that your head is exactly where my head is.
Perfect. And we did a lot of work here. So I just encourage you to get up to date with the work that was done, the community feedback that we had. We just lost momentum with the pandemic, essentially. I mean, it sort of
I understand.
fell aside, but it hasn't gone away, right?
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. Not at all.
If I may, it was a year ago, in June of 2021, where we as a board passed a resolution. So when we're doing this partnership, just making sure that it fits within that comprehensive long-term plan of where our community and the work that was done on that committee, making sure that the committee work and the community's priorities are in alignment with going forward with what we do at the facility.
Can do. Will do.
All right. Matt, any questions or comments on priority 5?
No, thank you.
Teresa?
No, thank you.
You're welcome.
Tiffany, any other comments?
No, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much. Dr. Summers, thank you again.
My pleasure.
Next item is C6, legislative update. Dr. Summers and Tiffany Upchurch will recap the now closed 2022 legislative session.
So I'll jump in real quick. If you notice, there's not anything in board docs on this really right now, except for the CASB legislative piece, and this is very comprehensive. There was only 28. So first of all, let me back up. CASB, when we worked with CASB and when we're doing a lot of the legislative and lobbying work that goes into this, there was 109 bills that influenced education this year, and only 28 of those 109 did not pass. So to try and sum that up in 10 minutes is a task. So this document is a really good document. And I would encourage my fellow board members as we're going through this, I think it'd be better to break it down into questions you might have about a specific legislative policy. And I also want to point out that when you're looking at this, and as you're scrolling through, if you go down to starts at the legislative summary starts at page 8 of the document. And you'll notice that there is a yellow highlight area as you're going through these bills. Those are highlighted because those are bills that when we are looking at and I point this out because when we look at our policy changes that we're making and how we're going through all of our policies and our matrix with our policies, you'll note that several of these bills require us to change our policies and to update our policies. For example, public school contract terms and conditions. And basically, the bill amends provisions relating to public school contracts that align with existing provisions in the procurement code. That's not what's important. What's important is we will have to change, possibly do a policy change, to example, for DJE. So when I was going through and deciding which ones should we highlight, I don't know how to pin them down because there are a lot of them. So I think that it'd be best to ask questions. Something that I want to point out is that there was an increase in funding, and that was a lot of work. And that's something that's important to my heart. We did see a increase in funding for special education services for our students. Other things that were on the legislation docket this year, assessed valuation taxes will go down to 6.7%. So that's more money that the state will have to backfill. What I noticed as we were going through the legislative session is when you go through so many of these bills, a lot of them are grant programs. So when we look at where we are in relation to how much money goes into funding education in Colorado, the grant, a lot of funding comes in the form of grants that just simply may not be something that D38 can qualify for. For example, rural schools are receiving grant funding to try and help educators, recruitment for educators at rural schools. That's not something that's really going to help us in D38. So just to keep that in mind. But I wanted to focus on an initiative. Casey, do you have something you want to add first?
Here was my thought process, and I know, Ms. Upchurch, we haven't really had a chance to speak directly about this in some time. It might be worth spending a few minutes at our June 20th meeting taking the impact to 38 from some of these bills, because some of them are very high level, some of them do have more direct impact.
Right.
And summarizing those that have that direct impact, both with respect to policy, which is consistent with our policy matrix approach, but essentially creating somewhat of a path forward. I don't know that we're taking any of these with immediate action as early as later this June, but some of these do have implications for related impacts going into 22-23.
Yes.
So it might be worth the board having, if you have a moment, to just peruse, and if there's any specific question you may have that you want us to go into more detail on, we're happy to do that. But I will commit to our team taking this a step forward as well and creating an action item, or an item, maybe just discussion, I don't know that there's action to it, going into the June 20th meeting. Just that way we can be purposeful about what those direct impacts are, if that
And I've already started.
is helpful.
I've already started to create a document when I'm going through all these that I would like to share with the board that shows here's how this impacts D38, either A, financially, whether it's an unfunded mandate or a requirement that we have to change policy, or a requirement of something we have to be in compliance with.
Sure.
Because some of these just don't, and so there's no reason to dive into.
Agreed.
It's good information to know, but as it applies to us, it's. But something I want to focus on real quick is there will be an initiative on the November ballot, Initiative 63, called Prioritize Education. And basically what it's looking at is Colorado is the bottom of all of the United States in teacher compensation. And there's also going to be, we're about 600 per pupil behind inflation since the recession of 2008. And so what this is it's going to be on the ballot. It's not a tax increase. It is the initiative will ask, the measure will divert 1/3 of 1% of the already collected income tax, which is about $900 million, to the state education fund. And basically what it'll do is if it passes, it will be for school districts to use for teacher compensation measure. Right now, it's not raising taxes. It's so it doesn't have to say shall taxes be increased by. It's actually asking to withhold those Tabor dollars. And 2023-2024 school year, the state will start to see a financial cliff because all the ESSER dollars will go away, and it's a perfect storm. So that's what this is trying to do, is get ahead of that. And I'm not saying we should or should not. I think it depends on what your perspective is as an individual, but that's just something I think, should be mindful of that is going to be on the November state ballot.
Thank you, Tiffany. In fact, that's very important that we're aware of that because that's a competing,
Correct.
would be in competition, I think, to an MLO locally. So it's important that we understand it and the impact it has. The other question I had for you is in the introduction, there's a call for resolutions at CASB.
Yes.
Do you want to address that briefly?
Yes. And I started to, thank you, I got distracted. So the call for resolutions for the CASB Delegate Assembly is, the deadline is the end of August. And something I would like SD38 to work on is a resolution basically that says this is our funding we have for education in Colorado. 50% of our taxes collected in Colorado go to education. And we get our per pupil funding, but we see so many bills come through that are unfunded mandates or grant money. And not that the grant money isn't important for a student or a school district, but can we buy down that BS factor first? And I think that a resolution that prioritizes buying down the budget stabilization factor as a priority before we start seeing more grants being passed. That's just an observation that I would love to hear from my other fellow board members if this would be something important. I'd like to pursue it.
Yeah, can we put that on the August work session?
Absolutely.
Anything else?
No, there's a lot.
Casey, anything to add at
Nope.
this point?
Thank you, Ms. Upchurch, for speaking to all that.
All right, so the C7 is board meeting schedule. Currently, we meet on the third Monday for our regular board meetings at 6 p.m. The second, is that right? Second Tuesday?
It's first or second, depends on the month, but typically it's the first, actually.
It's planned to be the first Tuesday morning of every month for board work sessions. There's, we all have travel, we all have commitments, but there has been a lot of call-ins, and like Ron's just gone this time, and there's things that happen in life. I get that. The question, I guess, and then any other board member can weigh in on the question itself, but do we want to look at any kind of adjustment to the board meeting schedule for the calendar year 22-23?
I'll go ahead and start off.
Thank you, Matt.
Sorry, could you repeat that, Mr. Taylor?
I just said thank you, Matt.
All right. For me, I propose that we keep things as it is. One of the challenges that I've experienced is due to COVID. The courts were closed for an extended period of time, and I am doing a lot more court appearances, essentially trying to catch up on caseloads. So what I would propose that we do is whatever we decide today or in the near future, if Vicki could kindly send out Google invites for all those, I could block all the time off my calendar, and it would be more efficient for me. The further out I can know it. Sometimes I have hearings that are scheduled, anywhere from 9 months to a year and a half out. And I know that we typically have the same time, but sometimes things change as well. So my preference would be to keep it as it is. For me personally, I would prefer doing as much business as we can during the workday to minimize or reduce the amount of time we have to take from our families. And then furthermore, if anyone would be interested in starting earlier than 8 a.m., for any of the work sessions, I would definitely be interested in that as well.
And Matt, just to clarify, the attachment to this agenda item has the meeting dates and the work session dates, and you're good with those dates. Is that correct?
Well, I'm good with continuing on with the same schedule. If you're asking me if I'm available for each one of those dates, I have not judiciously gone through my schedule to see if there's a conflict.
Okay, but these
And for
dates,
me,
Vicki, these reflect the general idea that it's the third Monday and the first Tuesday of each month.
Okay. Then I'll immediately put those on my calendar and make sure the time's reserved. And this year, quite frankly, I've probably called in more than I have the previous 6 years I've been on the board, and it's namely just to do to the challenge that I have with court appearances and other professional commitments. So I appreciate your patience, Mr. Taylor.
Well, next time I see you, I'll introduce myself. All right. So what I heard from Matt is that this schedule that you proposed looks good. The question I still heard, though, was we've generally started at 10, the work sessions. Today we started at 8 because we had a special session for the budget review. What is our normal time to start?
Actually, I do think we've been
9 a.m.?
been at 9, or I thought, was it 9 to 11? Or 8?
I think it's traditionally been 9. I like the earlier 8, or I know 7 might be a stretch for some of our team members, but I think the earlier we could have this meeting, at least for me personally, it would be more helpful.
Yeah, my inclination would be earlier as well. When you put it right in the middle of the morning, you lose the whole morning. I'd rather have earlier or end at noon. But that's my
I was just doing a cursory glance. They've typically been 8 to 10. Is 8 still okay? We have maneuvered them on occasion. We've done a 9 to 11 on, I think that was the month of May when we had the breakfast that we were supporting. But is 8 o'clock, Mr. Clausen, is 8 o'clock an acceptable start time?
Yeah, that 8 o'clock would be fine. Once again, if anyone wanted to do 6:37, I would be perfectly open for that as well.
Okay.
Any comments?
So my thought is, when we're having our meetings, I think it is important that we as a board of 5 are here as much as possible, because there's something to be said for being lost in translation when things are being done digitally by phone, losing reception, losing dropped phone calls. So that also takes up time. But if we have these, we had our work session dates in advance from last year. So I would just encourage each other to make it a priority. And this isn't directed at any one person at all. We all have things that come up. But if we can start seeing each other in person again, I think that would be valuable to the discussion. I think there's a interpersonal piece that goes into that too. And I'm on board with Matt. Matt, 7:30 is a little early for me. I still have to get kids to school. But 8 o'clock works for me still. And the Monday evening dates, I made that my priority, and I have that all of them blocked off. So if I'm not here or I have to call in, it's because some extenuating circumstance has indeed occurred.
Okay, Teresa, any comments on the scheduling? So what we've heard so far is we're going to stick with our schedule, and the work sessions will begin at 8 a.m. That's where we're currently at.
Sure. I just want to verify you can hear me right now.
Yes.
Yeah, so 8 a.m. Works perfectly for me. I'm always open to earlier as well, if and when that's ever decided. I will be out of town on October 4th and unable to call in on that date. I realize I've called into a number of meetings, and that's just due to my own extended family circumstances the last year and a half. So just for my fellow board members, know that I'm doing the best I can, and I apologize for the inconvenience of calling in.
No apologies necessary, and thank you. So my inclination would be to start at 7, but, I'm happy with 8 as well. If we have to have an extended meeting or special, accommodations, can we always aim for earlier, just as a matter of course?
Happy to. Yeah, and we can always confirm that with as much advance notice as possible.
Okay.
There are a few dates I just want to call out that in this draft form aren't always as clean as the third Monday. So with your permission, we can circle the one that we think works best. For example, I'm just going to hover on January 9th or 17th. If we have a work session on the 3rd, my recommendation would that we do January 17th, which would shift to, I believe that's a Tuesday. Is that right, Vicki? Because of the Martin Luther King holiday. So there are some exceptions to our rule. But if we can revise this with that in mind as we're working to finalize it, we would be asking for approval going into the June 20th meeting. And then, Mr. Taylor, actually one more thing that I have not mentioned yet, and that is if we are able to identify a date in early August where we can have a beginning of the year retreat in lieu of a work session, that would be still my request from the board. So it might be incumbent upon us to find some dates, and Mr. Taylor, maybe you and I can take the lead on figuring out what works for everybody early August prior to school starting, so that we can try to get something on the calendar.
Can I X one weekend? The first weekend in the first Thursday through Monday of August, I will be off grid and out of town with a backpack up somewhere high in the out country.
Well, that's the only time we can meet, though. Just kidding.
Ms. Upchurch, is that the 4th through the 8th?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for letting us know that already.
So I think what I'm hearing is we still have some variability in a couple of these meetings. And I think if we could ask Vicki to send out meeting invites to all the board members, and then I just would ask all the board members, and I'll follow up with Ron to make sure he understands this as well, that we reply to those email invites so they're all on our calendar. We all agree to the date, and or if there's a reason you're going to be gone, that's okay. I don't want to make it anything else. But it would be nice just to lock down the dates on everybody's calendar. I heard that in our discussion this morning. And generally speaking, we're going to maintain our schedule. We'll start our work sessions at 8. There are a few exceptions, and those will be noted in the email invites. And if there's an issue with anyone, just raise it meeting by meeting that has a potential issue for you personally. Is that sufficient for you, Casey and Vicki?
I will answer for both of us. Yes, that sounds great.
Awesome. Any other comments on that? Are we good?
Yes, sir.
Let's go to C8, board member reflections, and I'm going to do it in the order of the table. So I've got Tiffany, and then, excuse me, I'm wrong. I have Matt, I have Tiffany, and then Teresa, and I'll conclude. Matt, any comments, reflections?
Thank you, Chris. Once again, I apologize for being tardy for this board session meeting. This is more of a question, and maybe it's something that we need to put on a work session agenda. So I saw the announcement for both Lewis Palmer and Palmer Ridge that the goal, if I read it correctly, was to put a Chromebook in nearly everyone's hands.
A what?
A concern that I've heard from many parents is that when these devices are at school, logging onto their network, there's a lot of security protocols in place that prohibit them from going to websites, or if they do, as we heard at a recent board meeting, that immediately administrators are notified. From my understanding, those same protocols don't exist when they take the device home. And I've heard from several parents that have had some very negative experiences with the Chromebooks and essentially unfettered access to the internet. So I'm not as versed on this topic as I should, but if this is a topic that we need to pass on, I understand. But I think it would be helpful that if we do have students taking Chromebooks home, the parents have to acknowledge that the district is not providing any safety protocols when the kid has that device at the house. And then furthermore, I would like to see there more information on the opt-out program. So if we have parents that have these devices that the school is issuing, I've had a child attend a different district where he's been told, well, you have to use this school device, where we pushed the issue a little bit and we were able to get him another device that had some safety protocols. So, Casey, I don't know if you could briefly address that, and if you can't or don't feel comfortable doing so, if we could kindly make that a agenda item for our next work session meeting, that'd be much appreciated.
Matt, thank you. What I'd like to do is make that a priority item at our upcoming August work session, and we can be well prepared. And I'm happy to share additional information even in advance of that as that becomes more firmed up. So thank you for bringing that up. It's a very important topic.
Okay. Mr. Taylor, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Tiffany?
My one reflection is all of the information that was presented today, all 5 priorities, was really good information with a lot of great takeaways, a lot of really good discussion ideas that came forth. And so I appreciate the work we got done today. I also wanted to invite fellow board members that Chalkbeat Colorado is hosting a virtual panel on mental health this Wednesday, June 8th. It starts at 5 our time, Mountain Time. It's nationally, but it'll be a panel that will cover the mental health landscape that it looks like today with our young adults and our students. It's going to be a student-led panel. And so I would encourage anybody that wants to just tune in. It's going to be basically a Zoom, and I can send the evite out to anybody, email. And lastly, the reminder of why we do what we do was our graduations. And so it was it's always such a treat. And this year's graduations, it was, as we noted, that was Bridget O'Connor's first graduation at the World Arena as the principal, even though she's been a principal for 3 years. So it was just, there was always something moving about our graduations. As an example, this year, what moved me was 2 young students with amazing voices. There's some technical difficulties, and these 2 young ladies got the entire arena to do the wave as a filler while they're waiting for technical difficulties. And it just, I don't know why I bring it up. It was just something moving, and I just applaud all of our educators and this entire system for the students that come out of our school, the students that go into our schools starting early, and their accomplishments and their growth when they leave our buildings. So, and happy summer. Although we still have I guess we still have a board meeting coming up, but still, happy summer.
Thank you, Tiffany. Teresa?
I don't have any additional comments today, but thanks for all the efforts given the numerous presentations.
Thank you, Teresa. My reflection is sort of over the whole year as well, and I've actually thought recently, for some reason, about what's really most important, or what do we value as a community. And I think that our children and their education is pretty high on everybody's priority list. And I'm grateful to serve on this board to observe and to learn what our school system is doing on behalf of our children and their education. I personally think it's second to none. And I'm grateful for every teacher, every secretary, every bus driver, everybody who does anything to help support the public education system for Lewis Palmer School District. And I just want to reiterate, its value is second to none in most of our homes. And so it's a great thing to be a part of. It's a great thing to witness the extraordinary talents of our youth. And those that struggle, it's still, it's a great thing to witness their growth and so on. We live in a tumultuous time, and I've said this for campaign purposes, but I think for children it's even more so. We ban certain access to social media in our home during certain hours because of the unsocial aspect that exists. Whether it's good or bad or indifferent to people, it exists, and it has a real strong impact on kids' feelings. And so I see those things happening, and I hope that all parents, all community members will appreciate the value of what we're doing in trying to educate our children. Dr. Summers?
Well, I will just attempt to wrap up what I think. I appreciate your comments, really the entire board, and echoing what Ms. Upchurch said. This has been a fruitful work session. Grateful for how every individual within our system, to include our staff as well as our kids and our families, are leaning in to these really hard times. To your point, Mr. Taylor, as I think about what we can reflect upon in terms of both successes as well as continued challenges, what I appreciate about the summer is that there is, generally speaking, an opportunity for a pause, or at least a break and some reflection, which is well-deserved. And I am also reminded that how we spend our time over the next 6 to 8 to 10 weeks prior to our students returning is going to be critical to how we're setting the stage for how we move into the 22-23 school year and beyond. And so what I am very proud of in this system, beyond just the continued opportunity to serve, is that we're very clear on priorities. I think we have a very dedicated and resolute focus on what we're trying to accomplish. And we recognize that how we go about that effort is going to involve both the individual and collective efforts of members of this team. And so to be able to continue to serve and lead in a capacity where we can round the corner into the summer into an exciting new year, it's interesting. As much as May take out of you, as well as all the months that precede it, I'm already kind of geared up and looking forward to an excellent and exciting, albeit challenging, new year around the corner. So thank you again for all your continued effort in that. Thank you to a wonderful team for their commitments. And we look forward to one more meeting, I believe, before we have a little bit of a pause or a recess. So we'll see you all, I believe, on June 20th.
Yes, sir.
With that, we'll stand adjourned until June 20th at our regular board meeting. Thank you very much.